Hello, my name is Siobhan, and for my part of the Mexican Drug War project, I did the background information on the country. So I wanted to start off with the demographics of Mexico. There are currently about 116 million people living there. There is a GDP of $1.79 trillion. The primary language that's spoken there is Spanish, and that takes up about 92.7%. Then there's Spanish and Indigenous, which takes about 5.7%. Indigenous only takes up about 0.8%, and unspecified 0.8% as well. The primary religion is Roman Catholic at 82.7%, Protestant at 1.6%, Jehovah's Witnesses at 1.4%, and other evangelical churches at 5%, other at 1.9%, none at 4.7%, and unspecified at 2.7%. The ethnic makeup is primarily mestizo, which is about 60% of the population, and then there are Amerindians that are about 30%, white coming in at 9%, and other at 1%. The main natural resources of the country include petroleum, natural gas, and silver. Okay, so I just wanted to go over a few shocking facts about the Mexican drug war. There have been about 70 people that are abducted each month in Mexico. Most of the weapons confiscated in Mexico were bought on the U.S. border. There has been about 47,515 people that have been killed in drug-related violence since President Felipe Calderon began a military assault on criminal cartels in late 2006. And the estimated revenue of Mexican organized crime is $161 billion. Okay, so for the background history on the Mexican drug war, in 1969, an overflow of drugs began being smuggled into the United States. This was followed by a declaration of war by the President of the U.S. From 1969 to 2006, homicide rates were dropping, but they went back up drastically in 2007 when Felipe Calderon became the Mexican president. Calderon was the first to embrace a war against drugs. He sent 6,500 troops in to stop illegal drug trade. Many people believe this began the Mexican drug war. Violence increased from 2000 when President Vicente Fox sent troops to Nuevo Laredo to fight the cartels. It is estimated that about 110 people died in Nuevo Laredo alone during the January to August 2005 period as a result of the fighting between the Gulf and Sinaloa cartels. In 2005, there was a surge in violence as La Familia Michoacana drug cartel established itself in Michoacán. Okay, and for the cartel history, Mexico has been known to ship illegal substances into the U.S. for many years, beginning with alcohol during the Prohibition years. Extreme violence puts politicians at the mercy of the mafias, thus allowing the cartels to take control of the fundamental government structures and expand their criminal agendas. Now, while many factors have contributed to the escalating violence, security analysis in Mexico City traced the origins of the rising scourge to the unraveling of a long-time implicit arrangement between narcotics traffickers and governments controlled by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which lost its grip on political power starting in the late 1980s. Cartel leaders have continued to be incarcerated or killed over the years, creating a disruption in their overall function. Law enforcement has been repeatedly bribed by cartels in Mexico, and these arrangements have minimized the political power of those in charge. In 2008, the battle for Ciudad Juarez became the bloodiest point in the Mexican drug war. This accounted for 1/3 of all deaths over the next 3 years. So a lot of lives were taken at that time in Ciudad Juarez. So Tijuana. Tijuana is a huge part of the Mexican drug war. It's known as Mexico's highest drug traffic area, and it's the city closest to the U.S. border, and officials are always seeking to gain control of this area. In 2002, Tijuana had the most powerful cartel, but it was weakened when Ramon Arellano Felix was killed and his brother was arrested. In January of 2007, Felipe Calderon sent over 3,000 troops to Tijuana to seize weapons and guns. Drug mobs responded with numerous kidnappings and murderings of public officials, such as Jorge Altriste, who was the commander of forces, and Sergio Gomez, who was a popular Mexican singer. Around this time, there was a hospital shootout when cartel members attempted to free a boss being treated there. They were unsuccessful, but hostage lives were taken, which really angered the Mexican civilians. Drug mobs responded with many kidnappings. Okay. And now this is a map of the Mexican drug cartel areas and where they have the most influence. Okay, so at the top, you can see where Tijuana is. This is one of the most powerful areas for drug and crime in Mexico. And then there is the Ciudad Juarez area here at the top as well. And that is known as the Carrillo Fuentes organization. And then you can see the entire Gulf. Of course, that is a popular area for drug smuggling, and that's known as the Los Zetas, or the Gulf Cartel. And then at the bottom here in the green, we have the Beltran Leyva organization, and then the La Familia organization here. And then the blue area is the Joaquin Guzman, or the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, and that is all that I have on the background information of the Mexican drug war. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bruno Moya. I am doing my report on Mexico's drug conflict. I will be presenting the conflict itself. Other presenters in my group are Lori, Danny, and Shaban. Comparing the numbers, this number that I have here is from the Mexican government. 47,500 people have been killed from organized crime. This number does not reflect the disappeared or los desaparecidos, that people who have been just kidnapped and just disappeared. We don't know if they're slaves, if they're dead, or what happened to them. So that number does not reflect that. Mexican prosecutors reveal that this year, more than 1,300 people were beheaded in the country between 2007 and 2011. And the beheadings are an important part of the conflict because it plays a really good scare tactic in the community, and it sends a message to the other cartels. So If a cartel wants to start invading a city, they'll start beheading people and just televise it, or leave the body out somewhere to for everybody can uh, so everybody can see, and it's very effective in scaring the community. According to a Norwegian Monitoring Center's annual report, about 140,000 people have been displaced by drug cartel violence since 2007. What this conflict is all about, unfortunately, the U.S. is the key country that is driving this violence because of our consumption. According to the UN, there is an estimated 55 million users of drugs in the United States. Estimating the numbers and costs, the drug trade retails roughly $150 billion a year. Compare that number, 150 billion, to Apple, whose sales, just the sales, not their takeaway, is $173.8 billion as of May a year. So that's a lot of money that this business can bring in. $150 billion a year. They're not selling iPhones or iPads, they're just selling drugs, and they make almost the same amount as Apple, and an international company. The center of gravity has moved to Mexico because whoever has the geography into the United States has the prize. Now, what that means is whoever controls the trade routes is the people that are going to be controlling that business, and that's what the Mexican cartels found out, that they're the ones that can control the trade routes. Drugs are driving the violence. Elite Mexican military forces were trained by U.S. and Fort Benning to the same standard as the deploying troops into Iraq. Then they were hired by the drug cartel or Gulf cartel, and I won't go into the history of the Los Zetas, but that's one of the key reasons why this is so violent, because these guys are trained paratroopers in Mexico that know how to operate. Sadly, returning U.S. combat veterans are also being recruited by the cartels to train their militia. Now, a few years back, I was at the gym, and there was this guy that I kind of used to work out with. He decided that he wanted to hit me up because his dad was kidnapped in where he was from, and he wanted me to kind of help him out. And I obviously declined, but you know, it's out there. A lot of people can hit you up for stuff like this. According to the UN Offices of Drug Crime in the United States, people ages 15 to 64 consume the following drugs. This is percentage per population, so 1.8% of the population consume amphetamines, 14% consume cannabis, which is not surprising. I thought it was actually going to be more, to tell you the truth. Anyway, 1.9 cocaine and 0.55 opiates. Evidence suggests that Mexican drug trades organizations are working in conjunction with American gangs. So what they do is the cartels are the ones that control the geography and control the business itself. But once they get to the U.S., then they outsource it to the American gangs in the United States for the distribution. Drugs in play. Now, I won't go into detail with these drugs in play, but I will go into detail as far as why they're important. Amphetamines or meth, crystal meth, highly addictive drug. Now, it's important to note that in the 1990s, U.S. decided to have a huge crackdown on these meth labs, and when they did and it was successful, what happened was naturally that all these meth labs were able to go down to Mexico, or just move down to Mexico, and down in Mexico they were better able to mass produce this drug. To give you an understanding, the production cost ranged from $300 to $500 a kilo. For that same kilo, street value is $60,000. Now, these Mexican cartels have been able to get really smart on the chemicals that they use, because obviously other forces are trying to stop these labs. So what they'll do is make it hard for these guys to get some of the chemicals, but these cartels get pretty smart as to how they get their chemicals. So it's very lucrative part of the business. Cannabis, obviously, is one of the most commonly used illicit drugs in the United States. Mexico is number one foreign supplier of marijuana abused in the United States. The profits derives from marijuana trafficking, approximate net worth of $14 billion. Now, one thing to add is that this drug, the profits from this drug, since it's easier to use and or easier to grow and everything, and it's so easy to move across. What the profits, how they use the profits is by buying weapons, recruitment, and buying other drugs. Drugs in play, cocaine is highly addictive. Now, this is, I think, the drug that really started the cartels. Although marijuana has always been part of this violence, cocaine was an important role as to the violence because in the late 70s and 80s, it became a very popular drug and it was very expensive and only the cool kids did it. So it was everybody wanted to do cocaine, and then Mexico found out that if they controlled that route from South America, from Colombia at the time, then they were able to make a lot of money, and that's kind of what started this whole thing. Now, it is important to note that the prices have increased over 87%, while the purity has decreased over the last few years. And also 95% of cocaine that leaves South America to the U.S. go through Mexico. Opiates or heroin, highly addictive drug. Again, Mexico can grow opium, the plant, but it's harder to cultivate, and then you have to process it, whatever that processing is required. So Mexico can grow it, but like I said, it's harder to cultivate and produce it and then ship it out. So it's an important drug that is driving the violence, but it has a lot more overhead. Major supplier of heroin to the abusers in the United States, particularly in regions west of the Mississippi. So Mexico is who is supplying the western part of the United States. Soldier or cartel. Now, when you're a citizen and you decide, well, I got to do something about this, I have to make a decision. What do I do? Am I a soldier or am I going into the cartel? Military and ex-military often join the cartel due to good pay, but it comes with dire consequences. Still, it is a hard choice because civilians are killed and kidnapped, used, and raped. Military are often targeted. They are then victims of crime. Often their families are too. What I mean by that is, if you want to read this article down here from the Daily Beast, just Google this right here. And this story is about a Mexican Marine who was considered a national hero for one of the crackdowns that they did, which led to a capturing and killing one of the Gulf cartels, the main head guy. And what these guys did, the cartel did to gain revenge, is they, right after the funeral of that Marine, the cartel went to this guy's house and killed his mom, his sister, brother, and the aunt to gain revenge, just to get back, even though this guy was already dead. But he was a national hero. Another good way to search and understand more about this is a TED Talk by Rodrigo Canales. He's a Yale professor of business. And then this right here is a banner that the cartel has put up. It's a recruiting banner, and what it translates, it says, Operation Group Los Zetas wants you. military or ex-military. We offer a good salary, food, and we care for your family. Do not suffer bad treatment. Do not suffer hunger. We will not feed you noodle soup. Do not hesitate to call. So these guys recruit. It's effective because they pay very well, and these guys get well taken care of until you get your dang head chopped off. But it's not. I can't leave out the fact that also the military, they are also corrupt, and a lot of the times they use their force on the civilian population. So it's difficult conflict. It's hard and it's very sad because of all the violence. Have a good day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lori Grossman, and this is a continuing discussion on the Mexican drug war. I'll be talking about the effects of the conflict on communities. Mexico is a country rich in diversity, and this diversity also applies to its social environment. The social environment creates a contradiction when you look at the lush lifestyle at the resorts as compared to how the poor have to live within the country. More than 52% of Mexico's population lives at or below the poverty level, which in Mexico is $177 per month. 11.5 million people, which is 5.8% of the population, live in extreme poverty with no access to running water, reliable food source, or adequate health and education. Mexico's indigenous peoples are among the poorest of the poor. The human rights concerns within the social environment in Mexico are disappearances, military abuses and impunity, torture, lack of freedom of expression, gender-based violence, migrants, children, and orphans. According to the organization Human Rights Watch, between 500 and 1,500 people were abducted by government forces called enforced disappearances during a period called the Dirty War period. All these people that were reported missing are still missing. The government of Mexico claims no responsibility, and there are little to no records available. Disappearances still occur today, with over 26,000 people missing or disappeared. Many believe that this number is probably much higher, more like 100,000. Former President Calderon called these missing citizens open wounds for Mexico. Families continue to grieve the loss of family members. They spend money on private investigators. They don't have closure, and they fear for the lives of other family members as they pursue answers to their missing family members. People live in a state of constant fear of being taken off the street or from their homes. As one local official said, in a state of near civil war, with 3 armies fighting each other, it's the local residents who suffer, living in a virtual state of siege by the military. One activist said, "The ones who suffer the most are those that are left alive, and normally each person killed in a drug-related violence is mourned by his wife, his mother, his daughters, who are left utterly vulnerable, forced to deal with the severe psychological impacts." One of the people that disappeared is Israel Arenas Duran and his friends. They went to work one day, stopped at a bar after work. The bar was owned by the Zetas cartel. These young men disputed the bar tab, and the bartender, who called the local police who was working for the Zetas cartel. These boys were picked up and arrested, as witnessed by Israel's brother. The boys have never been seen from again. Obviously, this leads to frustration for the family, as well as mistrust of all authorities. The emotional suffering the family continues because they have no answer or a body to put closure to what's happened to their family members. One family member stated, "They didn't just kidnap my brother, they kidnapped the entire family." The military abuses and impunity continue to occur in Mexico, and they include killings, torture, rapes, and arbitrary detention. Of the 56,000 investigations filed between 2006 and 2013, only 38 members were sentenced. Oftentimes, the military not even brought to justice because there's an inherent conflict that military personnel are tried in military courts of law. So this undermines the ability of the government to stop drug-related violence and improve public security. Torture is also widely practiced in Mexico to obtain forced confessions and to get information. Common tactics used include beatings, waterboarding, electric shocks, and sexual torture. And although confessions obtained under these circumstances are prohibited, many judges continue to still accept the confessions. There's a strong lack of freedom of expression that occurs in Mexico, and no one's immune from this violence, whether they're journalists, artists, photographers, or users of social media. For journalists, particularly those who report on crime or criticize officials, they face harassment and attacks. At least 85 journalists were killed between 2000 and August of 2013, and 20 more were disappeared. Drug cartels use fear and intimidation in an attempt to control how and what people communicate about the drug situation. Violence and abuse towards women and children was being somewhat normalized in the country. Many incidents aren't reported because women are treated so poorly when they do report the incidents. They're treated with suspicion and disrespect, and no action is typically taken against the perpetrator, especially if they're members of the drug cartel or the military personnel. Women are often stopped and searched, and usually results in inappropriate groping and touching. The children in Mexico suffer greatly from loss, abandonment, abuse, fear, neglect, and starvation. In fact, Juarez has one of the worst records on child endangerment, with over 110 children killed in the last 3 years just due to crossfire. Children are also kidnapped and killed, or kidnapped and sold into child prostitution. One report states that up to 10,000 children in Juarez have lost at least one parent, if not both. And there are more than 30,000 children who are orphaned throughout the country. Children are also stigmatized by their situation, as other children and adults believe that their parents were probably bad people and therefore were killed by the police or the drug cartel. The aunt of 2 orphan boys said that the boys' behavior changed significantly and they became rebellious and introverted. Lydia Cacho Ribeiro wrote 2 books about sex trafficking and child pornography. As a result of writing the book, she was thrown in jail and tortured. Currently, thousands of undocumented women and children have been crossing the border into the United States, seeking asylum and a better way of life. This is the result of a law that was passed that permits women and children a free pass to enter the country. The news calls it a border crisis, and President Obama calls it a humanitarian crisis. Since January of this year, 52,000 undocumented women and children have crossed the border into the United States, coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. The law states that these children cannot be sent back. They can be sent to live with a relative or other person who's willing to care for them, a suitable family member. This kind of makes me wonder, like the Lost Boys, does the United States have the capacity to help all these children? And will they be faced with the same circumstances that will possibly bring them harm and suffering? Hundreds of thousands of undocumented migrants pass through Mexico each year, and many are subject to grave abuses on the way. such as disappearances and sexual violence, at the hands of organized crime, migration authorities, and security forces. The staff of migrant shelters face threats and harassment from criminal groups and officials, yet the government has failed to implement any kind of security measures to protect the people and the workers in these centers. At least 3 centers have closed, or the staff been forced to flee just in 2013 alone. Combatants have their own history and their own story, and the impact on the social environment in Mexico. Combatants are often recruited as children or as teenagers, and they're intimidated into working for the cartel with threats of violence to their family. They're told, if you don't work for us, that we will kill or harm your family members. These 2 individuals here, Rosario Reyta and Gabriel Cordona, were recently arrested. Rosario Reyta was recruited by the Zetas drug cartel when he was 13. He was kind of attracted to the narco lifestyle, and at 13 he made his first killing. In a CNN interview, he said, "I knew that my life had changed forever." And 11 years later, he said, "That's a day I'm never going to be able to forget. After that, I didn't have a life." Both these individuals state that they begin to see each other and other cartel members as regular guys, and they become immune to the killing. They're very attracted to the lifestyle and the money. It's a high-rolling, lavish lifestyle. It's the lifestyle of the rich and famous. Cordona had even commented in saying that you kind of feel like Superman. Reyta, in an interview, said that he regrets everything he's done, but that he couldn't take it anymore. It was hard for him, and he wasn't really living his life. Cordona, however, says he is not remorseful. He doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about the violence. His mind isn't haunted by the violent images. And he said in the interview, "I'm a real good person. It just happened." There are civilians in Mexico who aren't tolerating the corrupt military or the cartels coming into their towns. In Mexico, it's illegal for civilians to possess guns over 9mm. However, self-defense groups are being formed, civilian groups, and they're called autodefensas. In Cherán, Tierra Caliente, Tapalcatepec, and La Ruana, these are towns in Michoacan, citizen armies have taken back their town. They put up roadblocks and they search all vehicles coming through. The Mexican government, however, has tried to form the civilian groups into civilian armies by signing an agreement. However, these individuals are hesitant to sign an agreement, register their names, and give up their weapons. These guys are farmers, ranchers, and business people who are simply fed up with the lack of protection from the local and federal government. Although the worst of the violence occurred between 2007 and 2011, the violence and the disappearances continue. Families still seek answers for their disappeared family members, and orphans go to live with family members or are placed in orphanages. People living immediately across the U.S.-Mexico border and live in some of the worst conditions and face the constant threat of violence on a daily basis. Throughout the country, there's a general mistrust of government, military, and police. As it states here, the wounds of this war bleed into every corner of the country, staining the very fabric of Mexican life with violence, death, and fear. This comment was made by photographer David Rochkind, who spent 2.5 years in Mexico, and he witnessed the effects of the drug war on the people and the communities. One of the comments he made is that the psychology of the country is also changing as people become accustomed to horror and distrust, weakening an already fragile democracy. I am most fascinated by the space between what Mexico has always been and what this carnage is creating. The heat of the conflict is melting two worlds together, making a singular Mexico which is defined as much by violence and tension as by history and culture. Thank you.
We'll now discuss the action plan regarding the war on drugs in Mexico. In this, we're going to look at the U.S. federal government's involvement, as it has significant importance as to why it's not over and why it's failing. Starting with the Merida Initiative, established in 2007, with about $1.7 billion mandate to end the war on drugs. It involved our National Security Agency, where an awful lot of technology would be handed over to the Mexican government for their efforts on a bilateral war on drugs. Enhanced ground-based satellite communication terminals were placed. These had direct link to our own National Security Agency satellites, the utmost secure part of our nation's defense. Secure cross-border telecom systems were placed in border sister cities, 10 to be exact, whereas law enforcement on both sides could communicate. CIA operatives, military, former and retired tactical advisors sent in to assist the federal security forces with training and organization. Aircraft and associated pilot training, to include the Casa 235. Down in the bottom right corner, that's our premier maritime surveillance aircraft, the very one we use with all its secure intelligence information gathering systems for our own patrol of territorial waters in the war on drugs. This technology was handed over. Inspection equipment, scanners, x-ray machines, billions spent in the war on terror to provide secure systems in our airports and ports, handed over. Unmanned drones, intelligence gathering drones that would monitor traffickers' movement through the dense terrain. Aside from the $1.7 billion mandate, $3 billion annually, now that is $21 billion since the beginning, spent on our U.S. Border Patrol, 20,000 plus deployed, double the number in the last decade. Aside from this type of involvement coming from the National Security Agency, a year later, another $2 billion was appropriated in what we would call Beyond Merida. This is where we would address socioeconomic factors, social justice systems. The U.S. Department of Justice would be at the lead of justice sector reforms in Mexico. Such reforms would basically include capacity building courses for Mexican law enforcement, promoting the rule of law, strong and resilient communities, increase community and government cooperation, by addressing democratic institutions, justice systems, civil society organizations, training justice sector personnel from prosecutors, defenders, judges, and process personnel, promoting the rule of law, increasing the knowledge of and respect for human rights. All of this was meant to take a justice system that drastically needed reform itself due to corruption and making it effective. Our U.S. Bureau of Prisons were involved in establishing corrections academies to train to U.S. standards of accreditation. 14 federal prisons down in Mexico to date have achieved the accreditation standards of the United States. So what's been the rate of success? Well, the bilateral intelligence cooperative efforts, yes, Mexican federal police have become effective in targeting drug kingpins. High-profile arrests and killings of top-level drug lords as a direct result. Become effective, but have they done so? Most of those were led by the U.S. The rules of law, the judicial sector is stronger and versed and knowledgeable in how to effectively bring justice, but do they? The rate of failure is a direct relationship to the rate of success. The Mexican federal police have become effective in targeting, period. There's been numerous atrocities reported. The increased capabilities have increased ability to target anti-cartel activists and other persons who pose a threat to identifying the corruption regarding inside trading with the cartels. With this, the cartels are becoming aware of and proficient in U.S. technology and tactics used to thwart their efforts through their corrupt connection with the federal police and government. The current president wants to sever the U.S. involvement. He believes that not paying attention to the cartel could bring better result if he would pay attention to treatment and social justice. This may be true, but this is only after we've handed over all of the information technology that is necessary for the cartel to know exactly how we monitor and thus operate with impunity right under our security. The rule of law is being used effectively. However, federal government maintains its security forces as being above the law to keep the same from justice, as well as maintain federal police actions as being above the law. While we may have improved the justice system's ability and processes, the problem becomes that the Mexican federal police do not fall under the same system. There were 60,000 deaths and 25,000 disappearances at the hands of federal security forces. Under pressure, the Mexican military and federal police conducted over 5,000 investigations into the misuse of force at the civil community's beckoning. 38 were convicted. Problem becomes that while we've improved their judicial system, their Supreme Court and its processes, they mean nothing when the federal government, the ones committing the atrocities, are above that system. There's an interesting YouTube at the bottom that talks about the extrajudicial killings. Extrajudicial killings, there were 24 in the last 3 years. There were 39 disappearances as of late, 170 cases of torture, just in 5 of the states. The number is much more. So who's doing something about it? Well, it's coming from activists. People like Sister Consuelo Morales. She established the Citizens in Support of Human Rights. She documents human rights violations, abuses against civilians, killings, tortures, disappearances, the forced displacement of people from homes and land. She's been working in various indigenous areas, but she returned to her own home to find these abuses rampant. More so, she provides psychological treatment support groups for victims of both the security forces and cartels, but largely the security forces are her focus of effort and the atrocities they've inflicted on the people. She litigates key cases, spearheads public campaigns to demand justice. She can be followed, where her site provides much information into what's really going on. What can we do? We can advocate, we can join, we can donate. The Global Exchange promotes awareness and advocacy. On their site, Take Action Mexico, you can sign up for email alerts. You can petition to end the Merida Initiative. Those billions of dollars could be more effectively spent at home or towards true social justice, the psychological treatment. You can support the Voices of Victims Tour, a tour annually that goes throughout the United States. The Justice in Mexico Project, Awareness and Advocacy. Now, this website has links to Facebook and blogs where we can interact, be a part of the campaign and petition. It operates out of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of San Diego, where it conducts original research, promotes public discourse, and informs public policy related to the rule of law and security in Mexico. Charitable donations can be made through World Vision and the Alexia Foundation. Charitable donations support photojournalism and visual images to promote social justice in the world. Very interesting portraits that tell a story without words in the Alexia Foundation.